You're wandering through an enthralling art gallery, all of its winding curves and crevices. Suddenly a nearby man pulls out his handkerchief only to realize it's stained with blood. His memory flashes through his mind along with yours, and you remember everything. The monsters, the lifelike eerie sculptures, nearly being stabbed to death, and cute bunnies! This is the essence of Ib, another classic RPG Maker horror game. Since this game is so embedded into the niche online indie game culture, and it had a considerable impact on me, mostly in an artistic sense, throughout a large portion of my life, I decided to finally add this to the growing trend of me talking about underappreciated games. And since I was so interested in Space Funeral, come on, look at this guy. It only makes sense that I would move on to another artsy short RPG Maker game. So here we are. Ib is an indie horror game from 2012 that showcases the adventures of a little girl named, well, Ib. Through a bizarre art gallery displaying the works of the late Giratina, an underappreciated artist up until the point of his untimely demise. Ib doesn't stay within the art gallery forever, as she is thrown into Giratina's true world of art. The various works of Giratina come alive as he literally put his soul to his artwork. Speaking of the artwork, this game legitimately has some beautiful paintings and sculptures within it. Sure, you're getting gunned down by horrifying creatures, but you can still appreciate the effort and artistry put into many of the display pieces in-game. Ib is a game. Ib is a game that has stuck with me ever since its release, as I watched a playthrough of it when it came out while I was still a wee lad. I never forgot about it, and now, 8 years later, here we are. I hadn't remembered most of the game except for the characters, and it doesn't hold enough nostalgia to completely blind me from judging it fairly. Although it was very nice to see this game again after such a long time. I mentioned earlier how Ib has left a personal impact on me, and that comes in two separate parts. The first impact Ib left on me was when I was enveloped by it many years ago. It has influenced my curiosity towards creepy or unconventional art, along with abstract things and pixel art. The second impact Ib left on me was more recent and somewhat short-term, as it leads me to want to explore more of this niche old community and experience more intriguing RPG Maker games. Adding on to that, I appreciate the artistic motifs present within Ib, and it has definitely inspired me to add more roses or organic nature into my artwork, either consciously now or subconsciously before I played it myself. Moving on to Ib as a whole, the gameplay doesn't consist of anything special out of an RPG Maker game, but the art style is unique and the most appealing aspect of it. Ib pushes the bounds of the generic RPG Maker games significantly, which is a common trend I'm beginning to see amongst the most revered classic cornerstones within the fandom. With Space Funeral, you had a very harsh art style that in itself was a statement against the ever-increasing conformity to a generic art style that hurts the medium's artistic value, which is made significant by taking place within the RPG Maker engine and throwing you a curveball at the end like, haha psych, you've been playing one of those games the entire time. Space Funeral really shows how significant an art style it can be for any game, and how the visual flair to a game can attribute a lot to how fun it is. This is not to disregard all of its humor and other defining characteristics, of course. Ib and some other classic RPG Maker games do this as well, with their own quirks that make them stand out from each other. In games such as Yume Nikki, the art style is not as focused upon, as the gameplay stands out more than anything, but the design is still very unique. So in Space Funeral you got the art style, Yume Nikki you have the gameplay. What does Ib bring to the table? Story supported with good gameplay and fantastic art is what makes Ib stand out from other RPG Maker classics. Now there could be other games I haven't talked about yet that also do the story aspect well, maybe One Shot or Off has, but I haven't gotten to those games yet. So at the very least, Ib does every aspect well, with a great art style and memorable characters. The overall setting of Ib was mostly described already, but the most significant aspect of Ib's story is the characters and the vague story of Giratina. In Ib, you play as a 9-year-old girl who visits an art gallery with her family. I've said most of that before, but after being trapped inside the painting world, you find a DeviantArt user who's stuck in 2014 named Gary, who's arguably one half of the likable main characters since there's only two. Eve is less of a character and more of a catalyst for the player, as she doesn't have any set-in-stone dialogue and you can make all the decisions for her. So the only two other main characters are Gary and Mary. Mary is a mysterious girl who shows up within the hallways of Garatena's world and is a bit psychotic. Later you find out that, spoilers, she was a painting the whole time, and wants to be a part of the human world to know what it's like to feel, or something. I don't know why she'd want to do that, it fucking sucks here. From here you traverse through more exhibits, all the while solving puzzles and eventually going through important story beats that decide your ending. The endings are something I won't describe in full, as you should play this game yourself to get them. I'll only mention that there's a crazy depressing ending down Mary's path and a few happy ones that give you the feels. Overall, this game can get pretty heavy at times, either through horrific tension or heartwarming wholesomeness. Personally, I've always wanted an ending where you could save both Gary and Mary. This was mostly because I hadn't remembered how psychotic Mary was, but there are fan variations of the game that add a few new possible endings, maybe even some new areas, but I haven't checked them out. Only the ending I'd always hoped for, which brought me a lot of feels. The game is decently written. There's nothing outstanding about it, but it has some good comedic moments, along with the previously mentioned wholesome ones. Earlier I brought up the vague story of Garatena. It's mostly a neat little thing that you can find on optional books that you stumble across, that describe the story of an obscure artist that went through his life generally unnoticed. Garatena didn't like drawing people often. He always made weird stuff and poured tons of effort into it. Mary was one of his last paintings before his undescribed death, and the reason for why all of his artwork is cursed is never explicitly stated. Overall, the story is short and sweet, but I love the setting and the themes focused around Garatena. Not only is a lot of the artwork beautiful, but I can really relate to the aspect of being an obscure artist who likes making things their own way, regardless of it being weird or unconventional. So, while this part of the story may be insignificant to some, it holds a lot of inspiration to me personally, which is something I think a lot of these games do well, as they contain a lot of personal themes that either a common person or artist could relate to, as they're made by regular, independent developers and artists just trying to make something cool. From an unfocused viewpoint, it's hard to pinpoint on exactly why Eve is such a memorable classic within the RPG Maker fandom, as it does a lot of things well, and even after playing it, I had a hard time figuring out what to even say about this game. With classic horror puzzle solving, a good story, and amazing art direction, Eve is a good experience from its base, and that is made better by its unique atmosphere and themes. This game is easy to install and pleasant to play, so it definitely gets a recommendation from me. Oh yeah, and the music is pretty good too.